Kia ora. Hello from New Zealand. Welcome to the Third World Parliament on Spirituality, coming to you from the World United. I'm really excited to be a part of this event and to have the opportunity to unite with all of the beings on the planet, working with spirituality with people in all their unique ways that we shine our light in the world. So today I'm going to be sharing with you my work with youth aged between 12 and 18 years of age, working within a mainstream mental health service. So how I incorporate spirituality into my work in a way that empowers the young people that I come in contact with. So I'm going to be sharing just briefly a little bit about my background, how I moved into more of a spiritual paradigm, how I incorporate that into a mainstream service, and then I'm going to share with you just a few little examples of some of the people I've been working with to better illustrate how I incorporate spirituality into my practice. In particular, I'm going to share one case study. It sounds a little bit impersonal to say case study when it's a beautiful being of light, but I'll be sharing her story with her permission, and I'll be changing her name to protect her privacy. So where to start? So just a little bit about my background. Trained in, I've got a degree in psychology, a degree in sociology, and a master's degree in solution-focused counselling. I've been working in mental health for around 15 years now, and the way I kind of describe my practice is that the mainstream training is sort of more like a foundation that I stand on, or a reference point if needed. So I don't lead with that. Part of my mission is, as a spiritual practitioner, is to see people in their wholeness and in their soulness, their completeness. So rather than looking at them through the lens of a psychological disorder, mental illness, some kind of diagnosis or label, I look at the whole person and who they are at their essence and their heart, who they were born to be, essentially. With that, I'm very fortunate to have the ability to be very intuitive. So within my work with people, I'm very much tuning into my intuition and feeling into the heart of the matter quite quickly. So that's just a little bit about some of my background and the evolution of that into more of a spiritual practice, and just a little bit more about my approach. So in addition to seeing people in their wholeness, one of my knowings or priorities when working with people is to help them come into a relationship with themselves. So at their essential spiritual level in their heart, and tapping into, if they have a sense of intuition or gut feeling or deeper knowing, helping them really tune into that like a radio station, radio finding the station, really supporting them to trust their own wisdom and their own inner guidance, and to help them navigate whatever challenge they're currently going through. So that's also part of the work that I do. And I work very collaboratively with the young people. So a lot of the young people that come to me, they've got a lot of adults kind of guiding them, but more from their own frame of reference. So the way I like to work is to, like I said, tap into that person's intuition, gut feeling, own guidance, to make that the main sort of pilot light in the room for that young person. So I'm not putting anything onto them, I'm not telling them what to do, I'm not being instructive or directional like a parent, or sometimes they say school counsellors tell them what to do. So I'm seeking to empower them to tap in and tune into their own knowing and wisdom, seeing them as whole, not broken, seeing them as a spiritual being, not a diagnosis, and walking alongside them in their journey of discovery. So some of the challenges I face is in this role currently is that I'm working in a medical practice alongside GPs and doctors. The young person gets referred directly to me, and so I'm in the environment of, sickness, illness, and people going there to see the expert to get better. So the environment isn't really conducive to how I like to work in that collaborative way. However, what you do in the room can really turn that around, and young people are so wise and so astute, and they just tune into who you are and how you're working and how you're seeing them, and they start to see themselves through your eyes. So as we know, when two people come together with the shared intention of one of them feeling better, the energy fields collaborate towards that shared intention. So a lot's happening within the room, within the two energy fields. There's a lot more guidance happening above that as well, and I often get intuitive information coming through to share with the young person. So I only get given 4 sessions to work with people. So thankfully, with that intuitive ability, we get to the heart of the matter really, really quickly. So within that collaborative energy space, we're getting to the heart of the matter really quickly. And then part of what I do also is to wrap around that young person with the adults in their world by advocating and educating the adults. So I might do a lot of liaising with their parents, with their teachers, with school counsellors, that sort of thing. And I often have family sessions as well, where we're getting to the heart of the matter. So just a really quick example of a family session that I had recently that would incorporate some of these practices, these spiritual practices. I had a young guy, I'll call him James just to protect his real name, his privacy. James is 17, diagnosed with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder. So James had been essentially through all of the services, medicated, on and off medication, expelled from several schools, expelled from a tertiary course, and had also been kicked out of home and gone to live with other family members, and was currently with his grandparents, who were on their last, at their wits' end. So the family session was with mum and grandma and the young man, and so the session was quite full on. They were yelling at him and evidently very, very burnt out and frustrated, and they were really scared for his future. So some of the things they were yelling at him were, "You're going to end up in jail if you don't change your ways. You're going to end up getting arrested and assaulted, and you're going to end up getting hurt." And they were just so terrified and frustrated and burnt out that they'd resorted to yelling and shouting, and he was sitting there really quietly, which wasn't what I was expecting with the oppositional defiant disorder label, but I kind of leave that to one side anyway. And as I was listening to what was underneath everything, and who this boy was at his essence, and what's in his heart, and what approach did he need to help navigate his experiences. And what I did in that session was I let everyone have their say, and it's really important that people can feel like they've been heard and acknowledged how scared everyone was, how worried everyone was, how frustrated everyone was, and that clearly things haven't been working. The approach that people have been taking is just burning everyone out. So we kind of got to that place. There were tears of relief. They, felt heard, acknowledged, and they were getting the support they needed. And then I also affirmed how much love there was in the room, because underneath all of that, they clearly loved him and wanted the best for him. And he also really loved them and was sad that he was being perceived in this way. So we kind of focused on the love, and there was a tangible shift in the room, and it, as love does, it you grow it, you hold the space for it, and then it dissolves all the fear. So once we got to that place of love, we were then able to talk about, okay, what approach is going to be the most helpful here. So James wanted, all he wanted was to be perceived as someone who was going to be an adult soon. He wanted adult appropriate rules. He wanted to be spoken to with respect. So all the messages he was getting was basically creating more of what his caregivers didn't want. So they were where your focus grows. They were focusing on all the worst case scenarios, and he was reacting against that. So he had a core belief, because he'd been bullied all through school, he had a core belief that he needed to stand up for himself. So as they were coming at him, he was reflecting that energy and standing up for himself, which they were perceiving as defiance and disrespect, and they were just locked into this really toxic dynamic, and it was spiraling down. As we know, that can happen. So we neutralized everything with love, and we could all feel the shift, and then we were open and ready for a new approach. And the new approach was focusing on the presence of what you do want, focusing on affirming him, encouraging him. He had a beautiful heart. He was kind. He wanted to help people. He really enjoyed working. He only lost his job because he was kicked out of home and he was sent away from where his job was. So he was working for 2 whole years. So there's all these strengths and abilities he had, and his kindness and his wanting to help. So we recalibrated the whole approach to be focusing on all the positives, who he was at his essence, who he was in his heart, affirming him, encouraging him, uplifting him, upholding him. And in turn, James was really ready to contribute to this whole shift and to speak to his caregivers with respect, because he knew that was going to help facilitate this shift and this change. So basically they were, as a family unit, they were all really relieved in that space of about an hour and a half. And yeah, the energy had lifted, the hopelessness went away, they had renewed hope, they had a whole new approach to go away with. And that was the beginning of a pretty awesome journey for James. So the other person I wanted to talk about is a beautiful young girl, we'll call her Ashley. Now, Ashley came to me. She had been diagnosed with audible hallucinations and was on the verge of entering the mental health system and possibly being diagnosed or assessed for schizophrenia. So Ashley is probably one of the oldest souls I've ever come across in my client group and the work that I've been doing. And very, very tuned in to energy, very intuitive, very sensitive, very aware. So what actually happened with Ashley is she had been brutally bullied when she was quite little. She had been assaulted really badly. She's had a scar in her lip from the assault. And she'd also witnessed her best friend being terribly assaulted to the point of being covered in blood, which she just was totally traumatized by at the time. So what had happened for Ashley is that the trauma was trying to make its way out of her system, and it was turning into audible voices that were telling her to do terrible things to her siblings, totally out of character for who she actually is in the world. So she was becoming very confused and distressed by that. So feeling into the essence of what was happening, we had this, on the one hand, we had this really spiritual, highly aware, highly evolved old soul person, and we had the trauma, and the trauma turning into an audible voice. But because Ashley didn't understand her spirituality, what was happening was that she was getting the two of them completely enmeshed and mixed up. And so she was getting ready to completely throw away spirituality because she associated it with yucky, scary, dark things. and she was getting ready to go into the mental health services and possibly look at being medicated. She didn't want to do that. So this was her last ditch attempt to see if there was anything else that might help. So through the course of the 4 sessions that we were allowed to have with each other, my approach was very, very collaborative and gentle, very focused on drawing out Ashley's own wisdom and awareness, helping her discern between her own light and love and spiritual essence and the echoes of the trauma that were there. Once she got a clear discernment between the two, so we kind of needed to separate them for a bit, what we did then was we drew on her spirituality and her amazing ability to feel energy and work with energy. We drew on that to help her make sense of the trauma, to help her process it and eventually release it. So over the course of 4 sessions, what she noticed was that the audible voices were less and less, coming less and less often, saying less and less awful things, and she was just acknowledging them and recognizing them for what they were and loving herself through the processing of that trauma. So she kind of loved herself back into her wholeness, and she was so excited and uplifted through the session, like she didn't know anything like this existed in terms of support services. And she was just empowering herself and emancipating herself from the situation the whole time, and it was just a complete collaboration. So it was one of my favorite experiences. I have lots of wonderful experiences with young people, but that was definitely one of my favorite. So anyway, we've come to the end of the time slot. I really appreciate having the opportunity to share, and you listening. Hopefully there's something in here that inspires you or uplifts you, knowing that there's lots of us scattered around in the mainstream services, sharing our light and our love and our knowing in ways that are empowering for people. Just as a caveat at the end, I just wanted to point out that if there are people that are mentally unwell and need specialist services, I do refer them on. So there's probably about 2% of my client caseload that I do refer on to specialist mental health services, but because of the holistic approach that we take together, 98% of people are okay to be moving on with their lives after about 4 sessions. Occasionally people come back in that same year or the next year, but generally it's a pretty empowering experience for them, having incorporated, these spiritual practices that we do. Okay, well, thank you so much for listening. It's been amazing to be able to share. Enjoy the rest of the speakers, the wonderful people that you're going to come across, and namaste.